Hello and welcome to another video. So I'm going to share how I record tech notes using the Zettelkasten method. So I've got an outline of what we're going to cover in this video and we'll dive right in. So I'm going to cover the background. What is the Zettelkasten method? I'm probably assuming most of you watching this don't know what that is. We'll be covering more about Zettelkasten on this channel and its awesome powers and the app I'm building, Flowtelic, which is based around this. But this video is talking about how I've used the system to record my tech notes. So I'll give a brief overview of that. I'll also talk about what kind of tech notes do I record, how I found it useful in the work that I do. Then we'll talk about the usage. So what are the key requirements for using this Zettelkasten method for tech notes specifically, and some key tips on how to organize your notes. We'll dive into some of the tooling. These are the ones I have used personally. That's why I want to cover those to demo how it works, the plus, the negatives, those kind of things. And then examples. So I'll show you some of my tech notes so you can visualize how that would apply to your work. And I think that's really important if you're coming into this, if you're just learning this. And then we'll give a conclusion. How can you get started at recording your tech notes using this Zettelkasten method? Okay, so let's talk about the background. So what is the Zettelkasten method? This, it's a note-taking method. So it's a system for recording notes in what's called a slip box. That's basically, it's taken before things were digitized, where you'd write on index cards and you would put them in a physical box containing all your index cards. That's the slip box, and you organize them in the right way. And it's to help you do your thinking. This is the fundamental difference between having just like other types of note-taking methods. This one is to aid thinking so that you can connect ideas together and spot where two unrelated things can come together and actually generate new thinking, new ideas. And it's to stop you having all that in your head. They call it the second brain, to have it digitized so you can easily pick up where you got to without having to read paragraphs and paragraphs of long notes and documents that you wrote before just to get back to where you were. And it's to also maximize discoverability by interconnecting. So everything is an entry point. It's just like the human brain. A piece of music, a smell is an entry point to an idea, to a memory, and that's what we're doing with our digital note-taking method using the Zettelkasten method. So, in a nutshell, I'm going to go very briefly on this. I don't want to overwhelm you. It consists of, you've got fleeting notes, you've got literature notes, you want to record these. These are your entry points to creating your note system. Then you organize them into your permanent notes. This is your slip box. This is your wealth of solid kind of processed notes. And essentially then you want to create multiple entry points into that knowledge system. And one of those ways is creating index notes. So you may have and I'll show you how I use the index notes in a bit with the tech side of things. So fleeting notes, this is basically, these are just ideas. Normally we just put them into a note-taking app just to catch them. Some people email themselves, some people use Google Keep. Notion's very popular at the moment. It's a way to just quickly capture an idea. It should be one small thing of interest, one fact, one whatever. And you just want to get that recorded. And that's really important, that effortless way of recording. Then you've got literature notes. So if you're reading a book, if you're reading a tutorial, if you're watching a YouTube video, these are notes you've taken from their literature notes, but they are sort of captured at the moment of learning. So they may be snippets that you want to remember to give you some context. It's just like you're boiling your knowledge down. There may be ideas that you've had out of that, but they're not quite fully formed, not refined. But essentially, so if I'm on a Kindle, for example, I'm reading a book, I may highlight a passage and add a comment to that. That's a literature note. On their own, they're really hard to consume because they're not organized to maximize discoverability. Then you go through the process of putting in your permanent notes. So these are the organization of your ideas into your slip box, and a permanent note should capture a single idea on a card, link to other related notes that help create discoverability, and must be understandable in isolation. So I'm using an example here on screen. Flowtelic, the app I'm building, is deliberately like an index card, so you keep it small. And we link to other concepts like the slip box, and we have the backlinks as well. We want to capture this single idea. I like to use like bullet point lists for capturing ideas if I'm explaining something. Link to other notes, and yeah, if I were to go in and just look at what's a permanent note, I can just look at this and I'm like, okay, yeah, now I remember, now I recall it. And then index notes. So going back, this is a single idea. An index note is a top level note. Our top level notes allow entry points to a given topic, and I'll show you how I use that. So if someone else is looking at my notes, because they're tech notes specifically, then index notes are really good to bring in topics. So you get a comprehension of like where the boundaries of this topic are. So let's follow this back up. So that is essentially, in a very brief nutshell, the Zettelkasten method. If you're interested in more of this, hit that subscribe button, because I'm building an app around this. I'm going to be showing way more, and there's an awful lot more depth to how we can use that. If you're interested in blogging, if you're interested in YouTube videos, if you're interested in like tech notes, has been really powerful for me to document this. Then by all means, yeah, hit that subscribe button and don't miss out. So right, what tech notes do I record? So I've used it for code guidelines. So in my projects, we've got new people coming to the team. We're working on a React code base. We're working on a JavaScript. We're working on PHP, and like everybody has their different coding styles. It's really difficult to when you're working rapidly, keep diving in and out. So rather than being a dictatorship and saying this is how things should be done, I felt actually if I'm reviewing a pull request from someone and I spot something that like sort of has an anti-pattern, it doesn't quite fit how it should be done as a consensus, let me capture that as a note in our coding guideline notes, and that way we get to have this shared understanding. So someone new to the team can just start discovering the way we build software, and when we're reviewing pull requests, we get to view it through a lens of a shared understanding rather than personal preference. And the good thing about this is it's not one person just dictating. This is everyone from the team to contribute to, and the idea is that you discuss as a team, how do we want to approach this problem? Should we use early returns in a function? Should we write our React components like this? Like how we do things, if we can get things kind of consistent. And the really amazing thing for this is someone new to the team, they not only get to understand how we do things, it also teaches you the things. Like if maybe you've come to and you're a JavaScript developer, but we're using TypeScript, like these notes provide that value because we've captured the essence of how we do it in TypeScript. And it's like, okay, right, I can just dive in and pick it up as I go, rather than having to go do like a full course on TypeScript specifically. You can just learn based on what we've seen before and what our project actually has in it. DevOps notes. So these are essentially for Flowtelic, but also through my day job, we've been bringing in a whole DevOps pipeline to do kind of blue-green deployments, things like that. And there's a lot to it: monitoring, container building, Jenkins pipelines. And in order to keep up to date with all of that the team were producing, because I had to review a lot of that, I recreated this in the Flowtelic app. So I've got that fully kind of pipeline deployed, all from using Jenkins and that, which is really awesome. I do plan to do a separate video on that specifically to share how I've brought all those components together and how it all comes together. But in order learning that, you've got all these new concepts. There's Kubernetes, there's Docker, there's Jenkins, there's Nexus. There's like so many things. And the only way I could do that was to use this kind of note-taking method where I could just break it down and not over worry about the complexity of this thing depends on that thing, depends on that thing. It allows you to approach it more organically rather than top-down, which is really cool. And then Technical Playbook. This is a work-related project where we are going to be pushing something into production, and I'm looking at this through the lens of like, if there's a fault, we need to use this playbook to understand it. And that's where the Zettelkasten method is really good at providing entry points to whatever problem you're about to see. I want to know how to debug this app. I want to know how the backups work. I want to know, and so you've got these different points which you can enter, and then it links out from there. So that's what I personally use tech notes for. Obviously, that's only because that's what I've had a chance to use it for. I would probably use it for way more. If I was doing more design-related things, I would use it for that, just to capture what I've seen, what I've learned, how to do things. It's really cool. Okay, so that's that in a nutshell. Usage. So what are the key requirements for writing tech notes? Firstly, write your notes on the assumption that someone else has to come in cold on the topic. So if you're talking, say, a DevOps thing and you're talking about Jenkins, someone may not have heard of Jenkins before and say, okay, well, what is it? Like, where does this fit in the stack? We've got loads of things like, I'll give you an example, network container security, so that intercommunication between containers are encrypted. Linkerd is what we're using. We can put that in as a headline note. So if that comes up in someone's awareness, like, oh, I need to look at the Linkerd, they click that note, they get to know what it is, they get to know where the documentation is, and they get to know where we're using it, which is most important. And I'll show you a bit of that. Write them as though they're mini tutorials. So if you talk about how to install something, do it as a mini tutorial. It's repeatable. And then obviously if the method changes in the future, you just update the note organically. Link to other notes to explain what the tech software is. So rather than being over too much information in one note, going back to the whole single idea thing. So if it's, I'm installing Jenkins, right? Talk about what Jenkins is separately. Break it down as much as possible so that if you just want to do the installing part and you know all the other bits, you just want to follow the commands, there it is. You don't have to sift through, not this paragraph, not this paragraph, oh, it's buried right down. You want to keep it as small as possible. Use the triple backticks to do color code formatting. Just, a good editor will do that. Flowtelic will do this at some point. It would be really good if I can migrate my tech notes into here. That is a personal objective because I think that's really cool. And then you can have like live sharing and lots of other cool things, but that's on the roadmap. And then think of the best links that are useful in the context of the note. Don't link to everything, just link to things in context. So for example, if you're talking about a service, link to where, like an online service you log in, like Amazon S3, just link to where you would find where we store the login details. And in my case, we happen to have a vault that we can do that, or there's details how to add a user if you're the admin and someone's joined the team. Like, just link them out so that you can start, like, that next question you're thinking of, there should be, like, ideally there'll be that link from there. And then keep it as short as possible and cover one key goal. So if for example, if you're talking about adding a user to a monitoring system, talk about adding a user. But if you're talking about modifying that user or removing that user, then put those in different notes. So your entry point is, oh, how do I remove a user? They've just left the company. You're not thinking about adding users. You're not thinking about managing users. You're thinking about removing that user. And it's okay to create other notes as entry points and just link them through as like a little redirect type of thing, because as you'll see, you'll want to be able to just have that question phrased in the best way that you can find what you're looking for. So those, I would say, are the key requirements of using the Zettelkasten for tech notes. Okay, organizing your notes. Personally, I don't use folder structures. I like to have all my notes in one big list. So much like what we're seeing down here, this is one big searchable list. The reason I do that is because I find folders can start limiting you into thinking this note exists in one place under one thing that's part of another thing. And actually, no, they can be completely linked to different things. So if we're talking about credentials in Amazon, if I'm adding an S3 bucket and I need to create a security policy for this this IAM user, then does that go in under Amazon? Does it go under AWS? But we're talking about it in the context of our backup system, which needs an S3 bucket to back up to. And suddenly you've got these things in completely the wrong kind of domains. Get rid of it and just link them in. And trust your index notes and trust your other notes to make sure these things don't get lost. Use links to other notes to aid the thinking. So introduce other concepts of where to go next as well. So if you're talking about like security policies, you might want to then lead that on to how to set up the groups for that. So it's naturally easy to follow out. Don't overthink things. And don't automate linking. And the reason is a computer can't do the thinking for you. If you have software that tries to pick up keywords and auto-link them and add hashtags and things like that, you realize that you end up creating a lot of noise that makes it harder to spot the valuable links, the valuable entry points, because everything has just been automatically done for you. Just rely on search in that case if you want to find something before. And then do get into the habit of moving your fleeting notes into permanent notes. So this is if you know what you want to capture, if you've gone through a tutorial, do get into the habit of moving these into your permanent notes, creating those links, making sure that it's part of your slip box that creates that value add for all your notes, your second brain together. Having a lot of random kind of tutorials, links, things like that, just sitting to one side, they tend to get lost and tend to get forgotten. That was not specific to tech notes. That one is the whole concept of the Zettelkasten. Okay, right, let's talk about tools. So we're talking about what the notes, like how the notes are. It's very abstract at the moment. Let's get into the tools. There are two that I've used, Obsidian. So obsidian.md is a markdown editor, like a mini IDE for markdown editing. And they have the square bracket, double square bracket for interlinking. It's actually really nice. It's a really good piece of software. The notes are stored locally on your machine, so you can check them into Git and things like that. So definitely recommend that. So that was Obsidian. Sorry, just finding my way back here. Okay, and then VSCode. So I use VSCode for my coding. I've chosen that for the Playbook project because I just want another member of the team to check out the project, and I want it to, they don't want to have to faff about with plugins and things like that, partly because I haven't investigated the plugins. There are some really cool plugins that bring sort of Obsidian style Rome research. So Foam is a plugin that people talk about, which is like a VS Code version of Rome in a way. So it can do the mapping of your knowledge system, things like that. There are others. There's plenty out there. So do play with them, see which one works for you if you're going to go down the VS Code route. So those are the two tools we're going to be talking about now. You've been waiting for it. Let's dive in with the examples. So first of all, I'm going to talk about coding guidelines. So if I just find my Obsidian here, and here's an example of my coding guidelines. So very simple. I create two folders, one called indexes and one called notes. There's a README to tell other people in the team what this is, because it's just a repo that we then have that everyone has access to. So a bit of introduction that sits on the Git repo. But indexes and notes. So notes will just grow and grow and grow with different ideas that we want to capture. So, and then indexes are our entry points. So if we're talking about React, so we have React coding guidelines. You can choose with Obsidian, you can choose to have it in pretty format, markdown format, doesn't really matter. So here's an example how we use functional components. We use functional components as a standard in our project rather than in using class components if you're familiar with React, right? So capture one idea. So we talk about like when writing components, then you want to write it like this. And then maybe have an example how not to do it, for example, and then link to other things. So maybe you want to also look at how to type that in TypeScript. So you notice we've got React and we've got TypeScript. So then I say, okay, well, that's a cool thing, but how would I apply that to TypeScript? Link it in. It's a shared concept then. And now here's the equivalent of TypeScript. Actually, if I do it in this view, we get the code formatting. And add some hashtags as well and things like that. So this works really well to... for me, if I review a PR and there's something that doesn't feel right, I'll create a note for it. That way we capture that intent and then comment back on the PR. And eventually, hopefully, we can start linking to say, actually, this isn't the preferred way of doing it. Take a look at this note here, link to the Git, link to it in Git or something. And then that way we get a nice momentum and hopefully get to a point where code is written more consistently. So yeah, I have index notes, provider hooks, React project folder structure, like those are kind of things we kind of need to agree on, because everybody does have a different take on it, and it's got to work for the team, not for the individual. So here's an example of how we would document that. This tech notes tend to get a bit more lengthy, than more than let's say an index card, because you start putting code samples. But it's really good to visualize the good, like how you would say create a login form component, how you should lay that out. How would you put data providers for that? That one could even have been linked to a different note potentially, but we're talking about the file formats here. Yeah, so this is an example of how I create a coding style guidelines using a Zettelkasten. And then the cool thing about Obsidian is that you can start, it looks cool. I don't know how useful it is. So maybe someone can tell me once, who's got a more filled out kind of second brain of having the interconnected notes and things like that. But I probably wouldn't use this for discovering. It's more for just getting a feel for the types of things that are in your knowledge system. So coding styles, that's one of those. And then let's talk about DevOps. So I've got two projects for DevOps. I've got another one in Obsidian. This one I started creating prior to really getting into the Zettelkasten method. So I'll explain how I naturally would have done it before coming to this method and what I would improve. So first of all, I tried to break it down into folders, and here we have like concepts, but then you hit something. The reason why folders don't work is you hit a concept. It's like, okay, backing up Kubernetes with Valero, right? So we got some notes on this, but I might have a folder for Valero, or I might have a folder for Kubernetes, which I do have. Which one does that go in? Having the folders breaks that mold and actually then starts getting in the way of discovery, because like where they're installing Jenkins on Kubernetes, but maybe there should be some notes about installing general on Kubernetes, like stuff like that. So you can get an idea here where this hasn't quite worked. And I'll show you now where I've sort of upgraded this thinking in this one's in Visual Studio. The concepts are the same, but the editor experience is just different. So if I look at my tech notes now in Visual Studio, so let's get rid of that. Okay, so I have this thing called a Playbook. So the project is commercial, there's another business, and we're going live, and we need to capture everything about our DevOps journey as best as we can. The situation we have is we've hired in a professional DevOps engineer to set this up for us, but ultimately we need, as a team, we need to take it on board ourselves and actually understand what's happened so that we can maintain it and enhance it in the future. So the concept here is we have topic notes. So we're talking about like a playbook. So if I was to write this as a document, this would be the high-level table of contents, how you debug it, how you back it up, how the packages are put together, how we do the monitoring. The monitoring one's really quite interesting. So we have a series of things here. Need to fix a typo there. So monitoring the production environment, alerts, application monitoring. And as we go, we'll sort of refine this, we'll review it, we'll kind of tweak the index so it's more useful. But right now, it's getting something down and linking it is really good. The annoying thing with this one is I've not used the square brackets. I've used just markdown links. The reason is so that you can actually just browse this on the Git repo and click through the links. That's the biggest bugbear for me, and where the tooling lets me down. But had I explored a proper plugin, this may have been a better experience for me. So let's have a look at the monitoring of the production environment. So what I do is I capture like some to-dos. We have like tickets in our project management software, and I capture, as I review the work done, I capture the to-dos, and I'll go through and then create tickets out of these to finish this off. Very rapid. So the important thing is doesn't have to be complete. It's a representation of your current state of thinking about things, and then you can link to other things. So I like using the see also notation here. Is this, again, if I were to do this in preview mode, you get an idea here. So monitoring, we have Loki, Grafana, and we've got a configurator. So let's look at Loki, for example. Loki, this is now talking about a piece of software. And I would say Grafana Loki is a set of components that can be composed into a fully featured logging stack. Okay, so we introduce the concept and we introduce like things around it, how to access it, and then like how do we install it? How do we install related things, Prometheus? How do we back it up? What's installed on our production environment? So I'm thinking like how, if I'm new to this and I've just been introduced this concept Loki, how do I place that in the bigger thinking of our production environment? It's easy to get lost, especially in a Kubernetes DevOps world. There's package and package and package and package and package, and it's really hard to comprehend where everything fits if you haven't been doing it for a long time, if that makes sense. So here we have Loki, and we say, okay, well, we install that on a production cluster, so we get an idea of where that fits and what else is installed on there. So how would we install it? So then we create some idea here. I'm trying to go quite rapid with capturing this. If I had more time, I could produce, like, maybe fill it out a bit better, but essentially, like, here's the Helm up, command to upgrade that. Now, the important thing here is that you don't have to link everything, but you can see that the collection of notes that can build up over time, and this is probably a fraction of where we'll end up with in the end, but if I want to understand something, I could say, okay, firewall, let's think about the firewall. Okay, it's got a to-do on that one. Let's think about Helm. Okay, Helm manages deployments. Okay, we've got two commands. We've got Helm uninstall, Helm upgrade, so I can get an idea there. We use Hetzner for our DevOps cloud, so getting an understanding of that. Okay, we've got installing stuff, so installing Linkerd, installing Loki, Prometheus, Valero. Okay, right, got an idea of how that goes. And again, think of it in terms of discoverability, namespaces, right? Okay, and someone who wants to start understanding more of the system, even though it may not be directly related to the task, the job that they're doing, but maybe they're new to the company and they want to know what they don't know. That's the key here. If you put documents in, say, Google Docs, you got to know, like, you got to traverse through folders and sharing and all of that. There may be a wiki or a Confluence and things like that. Those help. But they are documents. They're not short. I've got 10 minutes. I just want to gather some understanding about something. I've got to read, War and Peace to understand the production environment because someone's written it. The problem with those kind of documents is they get out of date so quickly. Things change, and who remembers to go to the right part of the right document that's in one system? And if you have a knowledge system like this, it means that you can find the reference, the thing. So if we, for example, change our database backup process, for example, then we can go in and then you've got the related notes here so you can see what impact that may have. It'll never be perfect. It's a knowledge problem where you document it at the time it's relevant and it may become irrelevant, but having something that's at least fluid is quite nice. And then using Git, obviously, you can version that should you need to, if you want to remember what it was 6 months ago, because maybe you change the system and you say, well, how did we configure the old system? Go back via Git, look at the notes and all of that. So that's how I document these notes here. The only other one that I've added in is a questions folder. So these may be more tutorial led, like how do I back up the database? How do I debug application errors? And then what this will do is it'll link to the relevant notes that kind of explain the detail. And then the question is the high level steps that you would follow to do it. And I'll give you an example. If I was to look at, let's see if this works. We'll test this out. If I look at monitoring, so we've got things like access control. Not everyone can access the monitoring system. So we see here, so see this area in KeyPass. Okay, well, what's KeyPass? Click it. Oh, right, so our password system. How do we get access to it? Here's the desktop client, those kind of things. So very easy to discover that next step without having to, like, if you have like 100 questions after reading something because you're new to the topic, then hopefully with this system, you'll have 10 questions rather than 100 questions, that kind of thing. And then you can add the notes. If you have a question, it's like an FAQ, add the notes and get it filled in so that the next time or the next person that comes in, they don't have the same challenges. Okay, so that is an example of how I've used that. So let's wrap this up. Let's conclude this. How do you get started with this? So I would recommend try using Obsidian or VSCode. I think those are good. There are others, but Obsidian is definitely like one of the most popular. VSCode, everybody just may have access to that if you're in a development world. You may not use VSCode, obviously, but if you're going to use VS Code, do check out, spend a bit of time playing with some plugins, because I think that could really speed up your documentation efforts there. And I believe there's a way to, when you check out a Git repo, there's a way to signal that a certain plugin is advisable for other people to install. If you're in a team and you're using it, there's a way to do it. I don't have a note on that, so I can't tell you what it is. But just letting you know that the thing does exist. Then pick a subject you want to document. So start small. So maybe you're working on something, you just want to document how this works. I find it actually quite good to document, I haven't shared this actually, but in the actual code base, document how, say, the data providers work, interop between components. So a new developer can come in and just get their understanding together, rather than having to read code and comments, that they just get the high level understanding of how this thing sort of conceptually is brought together. Yeah, build it organically, but don't overcommit to documenting everything. You'll find you can't document everything. You're going to hit, everything you try and document adds 10 more questions, 10 more entry points to new concepts, especially in tech. But just sprinkle in the right boundaries, the right entry points of where you could go down that direction if you want to, and don't sweat it if you don't get to there. And then I like leaving placeholders for notes, for example, if it needs to be continued. I use the star to do, just so I know I can search for that, but you could use a hashtag to do things like that. And if you use a hashtag, they'll appear at least in Obsidian, they'll appear up into at least a view of all the things that are known to be incomplete, and that's perfectly fine. You want to build the map of things and then gradually fill it in. And the idea is, if you end up working on something and the card hasn't been written, you can write it as you go, and then you capture that knowledge. So that is how I would get started. So if you're learning if you're learning a new programming language, just create small notes that capture one single idea, code snippets in so you remember it. It's all about recall. One of the things I find that is the biggest limiter for people learning tech, learning programming, is they can recognize code just by looking at it. They can say, I understand what this does, but I struggle to get from that to be able to just open up VS Code and just write something from scratch. This is a nice happy medium, because you take the things that you recognize and you squirrel them away in your note-taking system, so that when you want to write something, say, okay, right, I need to write a component, I need to write a React component, you look it up and you copy the code, and you say, I've done a lot of coding in my time, and all my code, all new code I write is basically 80% copying what I've already written before. I haven't archived it. When you start learning to program, you don't have that archive. You have to create that archive, and this, like using a note-taking system like this, is a really nice way to sprinkle it in so it's easy to discover, and not one massive tutorial where you can't find your entry point. You have to read loads to just remember whether it's the right thing or not. So there we go. That concludes this video of how I use tech notes. How I record tech notes using the Zettelkasten method. I hope that's been useful. Leave your comments as to what your observations are, where you feel maybe this could be improved. This is a work in progress for me. But I feel like I've gone a long way from where I would have without using this method. And what kind of questions, it's hard for me to know what I don't know from your point of view. So tell me what bits you liked, what bits you still have questions with, and we can follow up more with it. And as I say, in this channel, I'll be documenting more of the behind the scenes of how I'm building Flowtelic. I'll be documenting what Flowtelic is, and more importantly, how to get the most out of note-taking systems. I'm building an app that does this because it's just that awesome. I want to share more on that. So if you're interested in that, hit that subscribe button, and yeah, catch you in the next video.